Hey everyone, in today's video I'm going to show you how to set up an inventory tracking dashboard on Microsoft Excel. You will learn a wide range of skills in this video. We will use Power Query Editor and data modeling techniques to clean and transform our raw data. Next, we will use DAX and Power Pivot to set up calculations which we will need for this dashboard. And lastly, we will bring all this together and use some interesting formatting tips and tricks to make our report stand out. I'm sure you're excited, so let's jump right in. Let's start off by looking at the raw data which we will be using in building this dashboard. I have 3 files over here in my folder. The first file contains the forecast, the second file is an inventory report, and third one is a mapping table. In the inventory report file, we have 5 columns. The first one is the product ID. The second column shows the expiry date. The third and the fourth column show the quantity and value of the inventory. And the fifth column is the inventory report date, which shows the date on which this particular inventory report was extracted. The forecast file contains 7 columns. The first column is the product code or the product ID. The remaining 6 columns show the sales forecast in terms of quantities for each of the month from May 2024 to October 2024. Finally, we have the mapping file. The mapping file has 2 sheets. The first one is the calendar table, and the second one is the product master data table. The product master data table has a product ID as the primary key, and then it has many characteristics of each of the product, like category name, subcategory, product name, and lead time. In our journey of setting up the dashboard, the first step will be to bring the raw data from these different files into one Excel file, where we will be creating or setting up our dashboard. So let's go ahead and set up a new folder, and here we will set up a new Microsoft Excel file. And name it as dashboard. So here we have a new fresh Excel file open. I'll first rename the first sheet as dashboard because this is where we will be setting up our dashboard. And then I'll add a couple of other sheets which will be our working. So as we discussed, we now need to bring in the raw data which we just saw into this file. There are various ways of achieving this. However, the most efficient one, in my opinion, is via the Power Query. So I'll go to the Data tab, Get Data from File and from Excel Workbook, and then I will specify the path where my raw data is saved. From the mapping file, I need to actually bring both the sheets in, so I'll select Calendar and PMD, which is the Product Master Data, and then I'll click on Transform Data. Once the Power Query Editor opens up, I'll just go through to check if the data transformations are done as I would like them to be. So for example, calendar month, calendar year, I'll just convert them into text for ease of use. So this looks fine. Now we need to bring in the other 2 sets of data as well. So rather than going out and again connecting to Excel, I'll just duplicate this query. Name it as stock report, and then I will change the source of this query. So it looks like the stock report has come up correctly, or it's in the structure that we would like it to be. Now I'll do the same thing for the next set of data, which is the forecast. So I'm going to duplicate the stock report. Name it as forecast. And again, I'm going to change the source of this, or the name of the file in the source. In this one, I want to do a little bit of a transformation. Before doing the change type step, I want to unpivot the columns so that the month names, which are currently appearing in the columns, come in one column and they appear along the rows. So what I'm going to do is first promote the first row as headers. Sometimes Power Query itself adds a step of change type, so I'll just delete it. And after the promoted headers step, I'm going to unpivot the other columns. With the first column selected, I'll go to transform. Then unpivot other columns. So this way, we now have date in one field, and we should label it as, or make the data type as date, and value will be decimal. The SKU code can be text. Very good. Seems like the data cleaning steps have been done. So now we can load this data. When loading this data, we'll go to close and load. We want to load it only as a connection for now, and we will add all of these queries into our data model because we will be using DAX and Power Pivot features to set up this dashboard. So I'm going to click OK. So there we go. On the side, as you can see, we have all the queries loaded. Now the next step will be to do the data modeling, that is, create the right relationships between these tables. To set up the data modeling, we'll again go to the Data tab and select Manage Data Model. This will open a new window which will be called Power Pivot for Excel. By the way, if you do not see the Power Pivot or the Data tab on your Microsoft Excel ribbon, then you will need to add it in by going into the Options menu of your Microsoft Excel. For a step-by-step guide on how to add these add-ins, I will share a link in the description of the video. You can follow those steps in case if you do not see the Power Pivot or the Data tab on your Microsoft Excel ribbon. Once we are in here, we'll go to the diagram view. In the diagram view, we can see the 4 tables which we had set up using the Power Query editor. The stock report and the forecast table are our fact tables, which contain the data. The calendar table and the product master data are the mapping tables. So I'm going to keep the mapping tables at the top and the fact tables at the bottom. And then I'm going to connect these tables using the primary keys. So the primary key in the calendar table will be the date, and I'll connect it to the inventory report date. In the stock report table, we have 2 dates. We can connect it either through the inventory report date or the expiry date. They both should work fine. In this case, I'll connect it to the inventory report date. Similarly, in the forecast table, we have a date column as well, which we added. So I'm going to connect it to that. For the product master data, the primary key is the product ID. So I'm going to grab that one and connect it to the article column in the stock report because that is what shows our product ID. And in the forecast table, our product ID is the first column, which is named as SKU code. Perfect. So now we have set up all the relationships that will be required to set up the dashboard. So now we can close the data model view and go back to Excel. As the next step, we need to create a pivot table out of this data model which we have just set up. For that, we can load any of these queries as a pivot table. In this case, I'll go with the product master data query. I'll right click on it, go to load to, and I'll select pivot table report, and I'll select destination as cell A1. Perfect, we have the pivot report set up. Now I'm gonna add, let's say, the product name into the rows. And just to check our data model is working perfectly fine, I'll select all the tables, and then from the stock report, I'll bring in the quantity column in the values. Very good, let's check the total to see if the numbers make sense. Alright, this number looks okay. This means our data model is working perfectly fine. I'll just sort the pivot table in descending order. Whenever setting up a dashboard, it's always a good practice to start off with a wireframe. So I'm going to go to my dashboard sheet, and over here I'm going to set up a wireframe of what I'm going to be setting up. Setting up a wireframe gives you a direction and a vision of what you are planning to achieve, and it also helps you build the dashboard accordingly. I'm going to fast forward the video for a few seconds here, and feel free to follow along. I guess we now have a rough wireframe ready. Now let's start setting up the data which will feed in here. First, I'm going to select column D2O and give it a width of 12. You can do it by using the keyboard shortcut Alt-HOW. And then we're going to repeat the same step for column C and give it a width of 50. And as we change the width of the columns below, the cards at the top have gotten a bit distorted, but don't worry about that, we will fix that later. Let's start off by populating the product name column on the dashboard. We will put an equal sign and link it to the first column on the pivot table which we had set up on the working sheet. Next, I'm going to drag the formula down using the Ctrl-D shortcut on my keyboard. We will drag it down 30 cells because we only want to show the top 30 items. Next, I will select all the rows and give it a height of 22. This can be done using the keyboard shortcut Alt-HOH. At the bottom of the table, I'm going to put the totals line. And next, I will select all the cells within the table and give them a middle alignment. Also, I'm going to wrap the text for the column headers by using the shortcuts Alt-HW. And then I will use the shortcut Alt-HOA to adjust the row height of the header row. As far as the stock quantity numbers are concerned, we already have them. So without waiting a lot, we can already bring them up. So I'll put an equal to sign, go to working one where I have my pivot table and link this cell to cell B2. There we go. And then I'm gonna drag this formula all the way down. And for the total row, I'm gonna link it to the total cell on the pivot table. Now for the rest of the columns, let's start setting up the DAX measures, which will help us get the data in the pivot table so that we can bring it onto the dashboard. I will go to the working one sheet where our pivot table is set up. And first of all, we will set up the forecast M+1 measure. To set up the DAX measure, I'll click anywhere on the pivot table or inside the body of the pivot table, then click on pivot table, then click on power pivot, go to measures and a new measure. We will name this measure as forecast M+1. We can store measures anywhere. However, in this case, I'm going to store all the measures in my product master data table. Now we need to define the DAX code which calculates the forecast M+1. But before we write the code, let's try to understand what do we want to show in forecast M+1 measure. Forecast M+1 essentially is the sales forecast for the month just preceding the month of the stock report. We know that our stock report is for the month of May. Therefore, the forecast M+1 should show sales forecast for the month of June. You might recall that when we were working in the Power Query editor, we had set up a forecast table. Essentially, we need to sum up the value column in the forecast table, but only for those rows where the date indicates the month of June. To achieve this, we're going to use the following DAX code. First, we are defining a variable called latest month. This is essentially the month of the stock report. As you can see, first I'm using the max formula to get the maximum date of the inventory report. This portion of the formula will return 31st May 2024 because that's the maximum value that we have in that column in the inventory report date. Then I'm wrapping the result of this max formula into a month function. Essentially, the total result of this variable will be a value of 5. Second, we are defining a variable which will get us the value of the forecast. We are using the calculate function here. In the first argument of the calculate function, we are indicating that we want to sum the value column in the forecast table. In the second argument, we are specifying the filter context. Here we are indicating that we need the value only for those rows where the month is equal to 6 or the month number is equal to 6. And note that we are not hard coding the value of 6 as such because we want to keep the formula dynamic. We are putting the latest month variable, which we know returns the value of 5 from above, and then we are adding 1 to it. Later, when we calculate forecast M+2 and M+3, we will use the same overall syntax and just change the value of 1. Instead of adding 1 to it, we'll add 2 and 3 and so on. For proceeding, I'm just going to check the formula. It says no errors in the formula, and then I'm going to format it as a decimal number up to 1 decimal places. Very good. We have the forecast M+1 number in our data set. Same way, I'm going to set up the forecast M+2 and M+3. The formula will be more or less the same. Instead of just jumping by 1 month forward, we're going to jump by 2 months and 3 months respectively. So I'm going to fast forward the video. Very good. We will just again resort the pivot table in the descending order for stock quantity, largest to smallest. And then let's take all of this data onto our dashboard. So to do that, I can just copy the cells apart from the totals into these 3 columns. Perfect. Next, we need to drag the totals as well. And in the totals formula, instead of sum of quantity, we can put CSTM plus 1 here. Here we can put FCSTM plus 2. And here we will put FCSTM plus 3. Next, we need to set up the calculation for stock cover. Again, this is also something that we can do in DAX. However, doing it in Excel right in the cell will be relatively simpler. So here I'm going to set up the calculation for it. It will be the stock quantity, which is D12, divided by the average of the next 3 months forecast. So that gives us the stock cover. However, there is one problem with this calculation, and that is if there are some cases where there's no forecast, this formula is going to throw up an error. So I will set up an if condition, which kind of first checks whether there is a forecast or not. So if average of the next 3-month forecast is less than or equal to 0, then we want to return nothing. Otherwise, we want it to calculate the stock cover like we had defined. So there we go, we have the stock cover. I'm going to drag this number and drag the formula down. Next, we need to bring in the data for lead time and the other columns. The reorder flag and reorder quantity can be calculated within Excel like we did with the stock cover, but for lead time and the expiry buckets, we will need to bring in the data from the Power Pivot using the DAX measures. So let's go ahead and set up these 4 columns first, and then we can work on the Excel. So for lead time, it's going to be simple one. We have the lead time in the product master data over here. We can simply grab it as well. However, as a good practice, we will bring it up using the DAX measure, because in case if there is any product which has which is repeated, which has 2 different lead times, then that will also be captured by DAX because we will use the max measure. So I'm going to go to Power Pivot, new measure. Next, we will set up the measure for the first expiry bucket, which is any stock expiring within the next 6 months of the stock report date. Before we dig into the formula, let's try to understand what do we want to calculate here. Basically, we want to see the quantity of those stocks which are expiring in the next 6 months. In other words, we want to sum the quantity column in the stock report table where the expiry date is less than 6 months from the stock report date. To achieve this, we will use the following formula. First, we are defining a variable called stock report date. This variable will return a date value of 31st May 2024. The second variable we are defining is the maximum expiry date, which is equal to the stock report date plus 180 days. Since the stock report date is 31st of May 2024, this variable should return a date value of 30th November 2024. Lastly, we are defining a stock variable, which will also be our output variable. This is the value that we will return as a result of this function. Here, we are using a calculate function. In the first argument of the calculate function, we are summing up the quantity column in the stock report table. In the second argument, where we need to define the filter context, we are asking to filter only those rows where the value in the expiry date column is less than the max expiry date variable, which is what we defined above, which is 30th November 2024. And onwards, we're going to use the similar syntax for the other expiry buckets as well. We're just going to tweak the date ranges and the filter context a little bit. Again, we're going to check the formula to make sure there are no errors and do the number formatting, and then hit OK. Great. So we now have our first expiry bucket in the pivot table. Next, we need to set up the second expiry bucket, which should show the stock which is expiring in the next 6 to 12 months. In this measure, we have done a bit of a tweaking. We are setting up two variables, the starting expiry date, which is the stock report date plus 180 days, and this would return a date value of 30th November 2024. And the second variable is the ending expiry date, which would give us a date value of 31st May 2025, that is 1 year after the stock report date. Lastly, in the filter context of the calculate function, we are putting two conditions. We are saying that we want to total the quantity where expiry date is greater than the starting expiry date, that is 30th November 2024, and lower than ending expiry date, which is 31st May 2025. Lastly, we will set up the expiry bucket for all the stock that is expiring after 12 months. Very good. Now let's go and populate all the data into our dashboard table, whatever we have. So we have the data for lead time, which is on column So basically the lead time information is column F and the expiry buckets are on G, H, and I. So I'm first going to copy this formula here. This is on F. G, H, and I. Again, we'll drag the formula down. And for total of the expiry buckets, again, we will just refer directly to the total cells. To complete our table, we need two more data points, which is the reorder flag and the reorder quantity. The reorder point is the point at which we believe the inventories are running too low and we would want to place an order to the supplier. There can be different logics for what should qualify as a reorder point. However, for the purpose of this dashboard, I'll assume that we want to raise a reorder flag when the stock cover is lower than the lead time plus a safety stock of 4 months. So I'll say if I2 plus 4 is less than the stock cover, then it should highlight a reorder flag, which should be 1. Otherwise, it should leave this cell as empty. Some problem with the formula. Now format one bracket. So now we can close it. Here the formula should be the other way around. It should be greater than H1. So let's drag it down. Apart from the total, we will drag this formula down, but only for the total row we will not have the reorder flag. Then for reorder quantity, wherever the reorder flag has been raised, we want to understand whether how much should be the amount that we should place an order for to the supplier. So again, we are going to use the if statement, and the first would be that we need Excel to check if this is equal to 1, which means the reorder flag has been raised. If the reorder flag has not been raised, we just want to return an empty cell. But if the reorder flag has been raised, then we would want to return the lead time plus 4 months of safety stock multiplied by the average forecast. So here we will bring in the lead time plus 4 months of safety stock, and we will multiply this by average of the next 3 months forecast. There we go. So wherever we will have a reorder flag, we will also get a reorder quantity. Lastly, we need some data to set up our charts, that is the bar chart and the 2 pie charts that we will ultimately be setting up. So before going to the formatting piece, let's set up the data for these visuals as well, and then we can do the entire formatting towards the end. So I'll go to the working 2 sheet, and essentially what we need for our first bar chart is the sales or the sales forecast by month. So I'm just going to pick up the same pivot table that we have set up on the working 1 sheet and bring it to working 2. Working 2 is where we will be storing the data for our charts and visuals. So we need the forecast by month. So ultimately we do not need the product name. And we do not need any of these measures. All we need is the value field from the forecast, and we need the calendar month from our calendar, and we can sort it Next, we will need a pivot table that gives us the stock values by category. So I'm going to create a copy of this pivot table. In here, instead of calendar month, I'm going to bring in the category field, and instead of value field from the forecast table, we're going to bring in the quantity field from the stock table. And lastly, we would want to see the breakup of this stock value by expiry buckets. So I'm going to set up a third pivot table right here, And in this one, we'll get rid of both the quantity as well as the category. And we will add only the three measures which we have created, which is expiry in less than 6 months, expiry 6 to 12 months, and expiry 12 months. And to bring them in the rows, I'm just going to drag the values into the rows. Next, we need to set up the charts, and to set up the charts in a more intuitive way, it's always best to bring the data outside of the pivot table. That will enable you more flexibility. So I'm gonna select all of this, go to insert, and I'm gonna insert a bar chart. Same way I'm gonna do with this piece. And with this data, I'm gonna create a pie chart. Great, so now that our charts are also set up, we can select these charts and take them to the dashboard page, and over there we will do the formatting. So I'm gonna press Ctrl X to cut them from the main page and bring them over here. And perhaps place them one on top of each other. So let's start the formatting piece, which sometimes can be fun, but other times it can be daunting as well. I'll hide the first row. I'll just make this column a little smaller. And then I want the outlines and perhaps the entire sheet to be green, apart from the areas where we have the dashboard. So I'm going to use the shortcut Alt-HH. And then I'll go to the more colors and select a color of my choice, which is 458 C78. Then I'm gonna do the same for all the other cells. So let's first of all remove the borders from our table. Press Ctrl 1, go to borders and select no border. So borders are gone, and then we will just bold this row and make it right aligned. So the numbers are not looking very good, so we need to fix that. We'll select all the numbers, then Ctrl 1, go to numbers, custom, and put 1 comma, which will make it in thousands. And for the negative numbers, we're gonna put the same thing under brackets and 0 for the zeros. Then I'm going to do the same for the last 4 columns, which is the reorder quantity and this one. For this top cover, I believe just the decimal places will be fine. Two decimal places. Next, let's format the totals row. I'll make it bold and underline using the Alt-HBU key. Also, let's make one more line below the total appear as white. Next, we need to update the charts, but before that, let's add a separator line. So I'll go press Alt and SH and add a line, which kind of separates these two sections of the dashboard. Very good. Next, we will take these three charts and put them in the right place. Again, we will select all the cells here and remove the border. You might have noticed that the data labels on the pie charts are showing the full numbers. To fix that, we can copy one of the cells from the table, then go to Working Sheet 2 and fix the formatting of the numbers from where the bar charts or the pie charts are picking up the data from. As you can see, now the data labels are fixed, and we will add the data labels to our bar chart as well. Very good. Next, we have to develop the cards. So I'm just gonna remove the borders that we had set up. And to set up the cards, we're gonna insert a shape inside which we are gonna store the values. So I think we can insert So we will take no outline, shape fill, and we might take a little bit of a shadow. So this will be our shape, and hopefully it will be enough to store the values. We'll need 7 of them. So I'm gonna create 7 copies. For the last one, I'm gonna put it towards the end, and then I'll select all the shapes to shape format, align, and distribute horizontally. Perfect. Now inside the first shape, I want to provide the value. I'm just gonna hide the ribbon by pressing Ctrl F1 so we can see everything in one page. I'm gonna put the value of the stock quantity. Third one, and the second one, we need the average forecast. And we do not have average forecast calculated here. So I'm gonna go to working 2, and anywhere over here, I can calculate the average forecast. So I'm going to take the average of the total forecast on the dashboard sheet. Then I'll just copy the same formats, Alt EST. So we're going to go to working 2 and link this one up to here. Then we're going to take this top cover. Next step, I will create a heading for each of these cards. So I'll fast forward the video for a few seconds from here. Lastly, we have to set up a slicer for category over here. So I'll go to working 1 and over there we'll click inside the pivot table, right click on the category and add a slicer. Let's select furniture. As you can see, the data is changing as we change the slicer. We will try to press a couple of other buttons as well. Yep, it's working. However, as you might notice, the slicer is not impacting the charts that we have on the right. So we want to make sure that it does impact them as well. So not all the charts, we won't want the slicer to impact the chart in the middle, because that is anyway showing by category, but the other two charts should get impacted. So to do that, we'll go to the pivot tables, and in the pivot table analyze the first and the last chart. We will go to the filter connections and ensure that they are connected to the category slicer. Similarly, this one. Perfect. Let's go back. And now if we select office supplies, you will see that all the charts, including the pie chart, the bar chart, and everything will change. Perfect. Next, we will do some conditional formatting. Wherever the reorder flag is 1, we would want to display some icon. So let's go ahead and do that. Next, I want to show rounded edges for the report area. To achieve this, we will add rounded shapes around the corners of the report. Now let's check if all our slicers are working fine. Let's select furniture, and now the data is shown only for the furniture category. Now it's showing only for the office supplies, and this one is for the technology. So I guess it's all working pretty fine. Before we finish the video, I'd like to add a few important things. If you roll out this dashboard, I can almost guarantee you that a lot of users will ask for more features. For example, some users might want to see only those stocks where the reorder flag has been raised. Or let's say users might want to sort the dashboard in the descending order of the forecast rather than the stock, which is currently the case. Or let's say right now in the rows we have product names. Maybe users might want to see product ID in addition to the product names. All of these things are possible in Excel, but we will need to develop complex macros or formulas for that. An easier way to achieve this is to build dashboards in Power BI. If you know Power Query and a little bit of DAX and you were able to follow along in this video, then moving to Power BI will not be a big deal for you. I have another video where I have created almost the same dashboard in Power BI, plus all the other important features which we just talked about. Please check out the link in the description. I hope you enjoyed and learned from this video. Please like and subscribe my channel. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.